All right. Well, thank you everyone for being patient while we figure out all this technology stuff. While these two give me a hard time, I'm sure you all can tell this is going to be a fun conversation. But again, this episode is really looking at sickle cell in the workplace, right? And so as part of our commitment at Sickle Cell 101, we really always want to talk about all the different important topics that pertain to our community. And for those of you that are not aware, October is actually Global Diversity Awareness Month. And so one of the mini campaigns that we've launched on our platform is really getting the community's input and pulse around, what experiences that people that live with a chronic medical condition like sickle cell experience in the workplace, or even while trying to apply for jobs, and how employers can support this community. And so, for us, we couldn't have done it any better than finding this expert here to really go through this topic with us and even share his, key takeaways and lessons, while also pulling in some key lessons that we've learned from the community from this campaign. If you haven't already seen it, we put out a couple of different topics around. I think my favorite is the side A versus side B. How do you feel about, are you comfortable talking about your sickle cell while at work, or do you not talk about it? And we got some pretty interesting results. So that's really what this episode is about. So I think the next thing that we really want to do is just to get to know you a little bit and kind of learn more about your work, particularly in this specific space, right?
Yes.
So I feel special, and I feel like I know you a little bit now. But for our audience who are not very familiar with you and your work, can you please tell us about yourself? Where did you grow up? And even most importantly, why is sickle cell important to you?
Absolutely. And thank you for this, Stephen. So as you all have probably picked up, I'm from Nigeria. I was born in Lagos, Nigeria, but I grew up in 5 countries and 4 continents. So I have lived experiences in Nigeria, Burkina Faso, Vietnam, United States, and Sweden. So for me, growing up the way I did, I was always interested in what it was like to connect effectively across cultures. That plays a through line through my current job right now, which is I describe myself as a cultural translator and a polymath in progress. As a cultural translator, I run a firm which is focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I go into all these companies to try and dismantle as many systems of oppression and suppression as we can. And I do that by consulting, running workshops, advising. I'm also a writer and a speaker. So my first book came out in 2019, and I speak in various institutions. I'm a professor, so I teach at Felician University in New Jersey, and then Imperial College in the UK. I love creating content. Podcaster. I've been podcasting since 2014. And for me, the reason why this is very important to me is I have the sickle cell trait. And so my mom, who's here, my queen mother, is the only AA person in the family. And so when she got married to my pops, he's AS. All of us, me and my brothers, happen to be AS as well. And it was one of those things that we knew at an early age, you're AS type, you're AS type, AS type. And as I got older, it was always, brought in some consciousness. I remember watching a show, I think it was The Resident, as a medical show. And I remember thinking, it's still not talked about enough, right? And so for me, the reason why it's important, in addition to the fact that I have the trait, is that I feel like it's our duty for us to talk about this, the sickle cell disease as a whole, in order to see how much we can use the resources we have to improve the lived experiences of people who currently have sickle cell, and to make sure that we are able to, fight it. And so it's personal, but I also just get angry at the fact that we haven't made as many advancements as I know we can. So that's why it's important to me.
Thank you for that response. And I think to your point, there's so much work that we can still do for sickle cell. And I always love it, when people can kind of talk about their personal connection to sickle cell, be it sickle cell disease or sickle cell trait. And for everybody joining us today, you all know we have great work around sickle cell trait education as well. We also try to ensure that we can include everybody else to learn about sickle cell, the totality of it. And again, like we talked about, you shared a little bit about your work and all the different things you do. And like I said earlier, October is Global Diversity Awareness Month, right? And we want to really hone in on this discussion. So I think the first question I want to ask you is, how would you define diversity and inclusion in the workplace in general?
Diversity is what the world looks like, and inclusion is making sure that those people feel heard, seen, and understood. When you try and think about that in a workplace, it's ensuring that people feel like their full selves can be expressed in the workplace. So their holidays, their cultures, the things that are important to them, their Independence Day, their religion, their lived experiences. And oftentimes when you look at the makeup of a lot of workplaces, it's set up against the backdrop of some perceived standards and norms. Oftentimes these standard and norms tend to suit more Eurocentric or white cultures, right? And so how do we get different standards and norms to be flexible and to be nuanced in the workplace without making it seem like some, caricature or some special event? So yeah, that's what it is. It spans across generations, it spans across age, spans across gender, orientation, nationality, and just even mental health and the way things are diagnosed and brought into the workplace.
Thank you for that definition of what diversity and inclusion is, right? I think the next thing that I just wanted to follow up around the same discussion is that, when you think about the corporate world, right? Can you even expand more about, for people that work in corporate and even in the corporate space, and even for your work as a corporate diversity and inclusion trainer, can you talk more about what you do specifically in that space and what are some of the trends that you're seeing?
Sure. If you think about in how it relates to this particular question, it's in the policies, right? And so what are the resources that are available for people from different backgrounds to work, right? So if you think about remote, can you make sure remote is capable for different people? If you think about sickle cell disease, are the temperatures warmer, right? If you think about the paid leave days, are you creating those leaves to make sure it's not suiting only someone that doesn't have sickle cell disease? Are you punishing people for who they are? And there are multiple instances where someone will say, no, this is just the policy we have. We can't afford to, make it different because that's going to do this or do X and Y. That's not inclusive. And that goes against whatever your ethos could be if you claim to be someone who wants to hire people from different background. And oftentimes it will lead people to not want to disclose certain things because there's a fear of punishment. But then if no one is being able to fully disclose who they are for fear of punishment, you haven't created a safe environment, and that's not inclusive. And so when I'm working with companies, I usually, on the consultant capacity, I'm usually going and meeting people from different teams and different backgrounds to figure out what safety means to them, what success means to them, what belonging means to them. That those three words, safety, success, and belonging, and translating that and coming up with a plan for a lot of companies. Some companies take that advice and turn it into actionable plans, and some don't. Unfortunate, but that's been my experience so far.
All right. Well, I have a question of my own, Tayo. This pandemic has highlighted the racial disparities within people of color, and more specifically the Black community. And this is, we're talking healthcare, police brutality, all of that. So a disparity that isn't talked about enough in the workplace is, these disparities are race, their medical conditions, etc. So how often do you think the chronic medical condition a person lives with impacts their opportunity to be hired?
Unfortunately, I think it has impacted so many people because a lot of companies don't have language to even understand this. They've created a system where there's there's stigmas attached to this. And when you have a stigmatized environment where you are not proactive enough to even acknowledge it in your company meetings and say, hey, we are here one for all, and we're including everyone with chronic illnesses as well as anyone that doesn't have chronic illnesses. We are making sure that if you need to get into the office during rush hour or if you need to find parking spots, we have designated parking spots for you, so you don't have to worry about that. Or here's the exit plan. So I think what the pandemic highlighted was, like you said, the disparities that exist, but it also highlighted that in addition to the disparities that exist, the systems that currently hold and house the people that we're supposed to protect aren't doing much. Then they're not doing much because maybe it doesn't fit their profit initiative, and there isn't an incentive for people to do something unless they feel pressured. And that's one of the worst places to be, right? You end up being reactive because you feel pressure. But if you're reactive because you feel pressure, you are not going to commit to learning about the people you truly are supposed to protect. And I'll always use the analogy of people who want to be doctors, engineers. Oh, Dr. Boateng, you're a doctor. So if you want to think about being a doctor, there are multiple experiences of being a doctor. The MCAT, the exams, the board exams, the multiple things. You still have to fine tune your skill sets at any moment. I doubt that you will say, oh, this patient, I don't like this patient, so I'm not going to treat him or her. I doubt that you feel like I have to stop being a doctor if I fail my MCAT or I fail my boards or I miss this certifications. It's an internal drive for you because it's something you want to be. And it's the same thing for anyone who claims to want to be more inclusive when it comes to chronic illnesses. You have to understand and make sure that you create an environment that allows you to constantly be educated. And that involves your proactive nature, asking the questions, making sure you learn from mistakes, not being afraid to make mistakes, acknowledging when you make the mistakes, and then revamping the whole culture to educate the same people that you lead to make sure that they're not being insensitive or calling someone lazy or making it unsafe for that. And that's where it starts. We all have to have some ownership, with this, and we have to do more than pay lip service.
Yeah. So now, are there any specific instances or stories that you've come across in your line of work around this topic that sticks out to you the most?
I mean, there's so many, not necessarily related to sickle cell itself, but to the inclusion. I mean, something as simple as me. I remember I brought fufu to the workplace one time, and everybody ran away. Like, oh, what the heck is this? Fufu, by the way, for anyone listening, is a Nigerian meal, but I had all these things. So this was a lighthearted one.
Ghanaian meal too. Let me put that.
Oh, sorry, it's a Ghanaian meal too. Those. Yeah, let me stop. But yes, it's a West African meal. How about that? Okay, so yeah. But if you think about that, right? Just that little experience where someone is saying your food smells and why are you bringing this? What that is juxtaposing that is, hey, that isn't normal food. Real food doesn't smell. You are doing something, even though it's important to your culture, it's affecting us. That kind of stuff, you call them microaggressions, right? Those things happen all the time. I remember when, Trayvon Martin was killed in 2012. And the conversation, I was the only Black person in the workplace, and I brought it up, and it said, why are we bringing it up? Obama's president. Right? Racism is dead. So stuff like that, would always happen where people don't understand the root of the issue. It's the same thing, by the way, with sickle cell disease and any chronic illness. People don't understand the root. They might see the actual end result, like, oh my goodness, I didn't know you were hurting. But that person's been hurting most of their life. Just because it was invisible doesn't mean it wasn't real. And if you haven't made that a real interaction in your life, that's dangerous. So
yeah. Tayo, I have a follow-up question to that, because we've been talking about these inequalities in a US sense, but obviously we have a global audience, and a lot of people here on the live today are in Nigeria and other parts of the world. Can you speak to how that looks like in other parts of the world?
100%. And everything all starts with the institutions we all, participate in: schools, workplace, families. The awareness programs need to be paired with understanding how to make conditions livable. I went to boarding school in Ibadan, Bodija. And then Lifeway International High School, if anyone's from Lifeway. And I don't, and this is not to shame anyone because I don't believe in that, but I don't remember, in any of the institutions in the boarding school where it was, communicated like, hey, anyone with sickle cell or sickle cell trait with the disease, this is where we can go. All right. This is what you can do. If you're struggling with classes or studying, we'll have these resources for you. It's that ability to communicate where you really understand how people are seen, heard, and understood. That could be done anywhere. Government in terms of funding, where how much are you funding to, to make sure that we're actually doing research and we're doing this. By the way, for in the countries that we're from, Nigeria has a large population of people with sickle cell disease. It should be an imperative on any president running for government or anything.
Yeah.
That should be a fundamental part of the healthcare plan. Same sort of thing in the workplace. One of the frustrating things that can exist when you have systemic issues is whether the generator is going to be turned on or off, but that fluctuating temperature has the ability to change someone's day for the better or not, and so that those resources should also be there, right? Hey, we understand that maybe this is going to affect people without the disease differently than it does affect those people. And so it really is about having those conversations. And one of the things I've sought to try and change is we come from cultures where we don't talk about our problems. We don't model vulnerability. And I'm really hoping that we change that, because it's not a weakness, but the more we start to model vulnerability and talk about how this affects me, the better we'll be able to behave to each other. And the more we'll be able to actually, have these type of conversations instead of the stereotypical ways we see them.
Yeah,
No,
thanks for sharing that.
putting that lens on that additional lens, because I know oftentimes we talk a lot very US centric in the way that we talk, but also just considering all these other cultural contexts that other people may be facing that it's a little bit different here.
Yeah. I feel pain should be normalized. I need help should be normalized.
Yeah.
What do you have to offer? What do you have to offer for this should be normalized in a sense where it's not going to go against your interview question. Hey, hey, tell me what you're bringing to the workplace. That's great. Okay. And then when it's your turn to ask the question, how can you help, modify the situation? This is what I'm dealing with. That shouldn't be an automatic no. And if it is, we failed as a society if that's what we're doing, because then we're not hiring based on ability anymore. So, yeah.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think, to your point, we just have to keep this conversation going, right? 100%. And get our whole world to a point where people feel comfortable, talking about some of these things. One thing that I think we've done a better job, especially these past couple of years, is, talking about mental health, right? For so long, those were some of the things that were always hidden. And I think if we can get to a point where talking about sickle cell or people living with chronic medical conditions and even being comfortable expressing some of these things at work, I think we can start changing the dynamic. And you talk about Nigeria and all these other countries that you would think, there'll be a lot of efforts being made that hasn't been made. But most importantly, having these conversations is how we can start to change a lot of these things.
Yeah.
One of the things that you talked about that really stood out to me was, you talk about that experience in boarding school, that there were no resources, right? I want to even take it a step further and ask you. So like we all know, a lot of disparities, unfortunately, affects minority. I like to put that in parentheses because that's such a subjective term to me.
Me too.
But, if you see, we're locksteps over there. So I think it could be seen in so many different ways, and people just throw words and terms around. But, even looking at here in the US, a lot of the people that are affected by sickle cell disease are Black, right? Or from, Hispanic descent. So I want to ask you, do you think that the fact that someone might say have sickle cell disease and also be Black, do you think that significantly impact, one, their ability to get a job, or two, their ability to maybe get promoted or get more opportunities in the workplace and even be supported?
100%. I feel like there's an intersection there. If you look at the stereotypes that exist for Black folks, Latinx folks, Black folks, if you can't do music or sports, lazy, right? You're not getting into the same places we have. So now let's say a Black person that has sickle cell disease is applying for work and can't show up for work because of a crisis, several crises. What is being accentuated that in that moment? It's already the bias you have. And so you then go, I'm never going to hire this person from this. Look, this person keeps missing these deadlines and all that, without you even understanding that the way we've been programmed as a society is not to reveal that aspect of ourselves, because if you reveal it, you're going to use it as a notch against us. And it happens throughout the medical field. I know you know this. There are a lot of Black folks that get misdiagnosed when it comes to mental health. The amount of people that we deem schizophrenic instead of bipolar or vice versa is so drastic that it leads to some sort of medication that you give, which only stokes that fear. Then you invite the cops. The cops they're not trained for conflict de-escalation. And the cops' presence is constantly triggering that person, but you are seeing them as a threat. So your instinct is to shoot instead of you to figure out, well, this is innocent. This is an attack. This is a panic. All this is, we need to get all these things. Constantly perpetuated. Same thing with pregnancy. I mean, it goes on and on and on. Like when you have all these things and across the board with anyone that isn't considered part of the majority, it's something to reflect on. When you have studies, when you have pharmaceutical companies and big resources and billions of dollars backed into resources that are only looking at a section of the population, that's so dangerous. And then when you have these authorities confirming it for you by saying, well, we tried everything we could, it's really just your fault, you need to dig deeper. When you truly have a problem that's chronic, whatever bias you have is going to be flared up in that moment.
Yeah. I couldn't agree with you more. I think, again, I'm always going to bring it back to the conversation that we're having here. You know, a lot of people, and I'll share more about this later, that data that we found for people talking about how well they feel comfortable talking about them having sickle cell in the workplace. I think a lot of it was rooted in the fact that, you know, what's my race? What are the things I'm already dealing with at work? Now do I want to throw it on top of it? So I think what you shared is very, very, very important. Go ahead, Cass.
Yeah, so just to speak to a little bit with what Stephen said before, we did survey the sickle cell community and see where people were at on, you know, on the stance of specifically disclosing their, disclosing the fact that they have sickle cell disease. 60% of them tell their employers that they do have sickle cell disease and 40% don't. The reasonings are actually pretty insightful, but you know, the number one cited reason for people who don't disclose that they have sickle cell is that the fact that they don't want to, I guess that's where the discrimination starts. As soon as you disclose that, you know, that fact about you or disclose your diagnosis, people are already starting to get discriminated against. They may not get the job. Some people said they don't disclose it until after they've gotten the job. Some people say they don't disclose it at all. In my personal experience, I was for a bit, I did not disclose my, you know, my sickle cell status. I worked during college. I worked at Best Buy. And I worked there for 7 years. And when I worked there, I didn't disclose that I had sickle cell disease. And it wasn't until I finally did, because I got really sick, I was laid off like a week later. And I had worked there for 7 years. So there's definitely consequences to disclosing, you know, that type of information in which people feel like it works against them and it hinders their career. So I guess my question to you is how would you advise somebody to navigate a situation like that?
Oh gosh, it's I am so. First of all, I'm sorry to hear that by experience. This is
I'm
yeah, you're way past that.
Yeah,
but this is why I get angry though. But Cass, though, this is why Stephen was asking me my personal relationship in addition to having a trade is I get angry because of this. The question, the way you frame the question is how would I advise someone? For me, the question has to be framed at the employer because it has to be an anticipated thing that you put where you say, we have these resources for chronic illnesses. And if you feel safe enough to disclose, This is what's going to happen. There is not going to be any consequence. We're going to flex your work time for this. It's not going to dock your pay. That's what should happen, because each person, if I were to give advice, not even having the same lived experience, I don't know that would be great, but it would be that person. I could give someone advice that could work for one workplace and wouldn't work for another workplace because of who is in charge. And so that's why, what Stephen was saying, what I'm saying is, if you don't have that conversation at the top and it's included in your policies and you're anticipated that, there's no way that you're going to get anyone to even disclose in anything. It's just now that people are starting to take mental health seriously, for example. So maybe now someone's going to say, I actually do have bipolar disorder or something like that. But years ago, you couldn't say that because they'll perceive you as someone that needs to be in an asylum. And so that's the language that needs to have. That needs to happen. And when I reached out to Stephen and I emailed, because I was looking for sickle cell organizations to reach out to, and Stephen's done a great job of creating this. I got frustrated that this wasn't even a narrative. And I'm looking at numbers of sickle cell and I'm thinking, are you assuming you don't have anybody with sickle cell in your office? You're acting like you're like the greatest organization and you don't even know what people are struggling with. Do you know what that means for them to even show up? And for them to even have that, and have you created a safe enough environment for them to say that to you? So, and I could say it to anyone, disclose, don't disclose, but that's going to be up to that employer. So that means that employers need to embed and create a culture where it isn't stigmatized, and that takes work.
Yeah. A follow up to that. In my experience, you encounter two types of people. It's either people who don't know or people who don't care.
Yes.
And I guess I'd like to ask what your thoughts around dealing with people who don't necessarily care. Do you believe mandates or policy? And I know we have some laws here, but there's always loopholes to this. And technically I shouldn't have been fired from Best Buy. And of course they didn't say I fired you because you have sickle cell. But how do you navigate that?
It has to be made law, like what you're saying. I mean, it has to be protected by whatever the policy is. And this is where the difference sometimes with different countries come into play. And this is a lot of times my frustration with my particular regime is when it's not a focus on the campaign, right? Where you are actually mandating that this is a discriminatory act. Okay. Where you're saying this has happened for race here, right? In the United States, it's happened for all these things where there's a protected class, but a government who's supposed to protect the country and supposed to serve the country and make sure each of the citizens feel well cannot have a large part of the population in workplaces unprotected. You have to be able to have those laws, and under those laws, underneath those laws, you have to state, hey, these are the resources we're providing. And that's where that comes from. Companies should do the same. So yes, I do think there should be laws and mandates, because there is the only way you can get people to even care to talk to those other people is if they have to think about it, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Because in their head, they're like, I have all these other things, which is ridiculous. But you don't think the same thing about other people. They have other things on top of these things. And so if you make it something that they have to think about, then it becomes a norm.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I love what you said at the end about they have to think about it. So again, more about my digging and research. So one of the things that I saw you recently posted was a video, trying to get institutions to take equity seriously, right? And there's all these different barriers. That's probably one of my favorite things I've seen. And the way the only answer was to get people to take it seriously when you tell them, hey, you're going to get sued, right? And it speaks volume to what you just talked about. And so again, sometimes you're going to get people who don't care, but if it's going to affect your pocket or if it's going to make a significant impact on them, that's kind of how you can get them to pay attention. I think, I watched that video and I loved it so much, but I started to kind of think about the sickle cell community and how employers can even help people without even not only worrying about, hey, how is this going to impact my pocket? A couple of people in the comments that Cass talked about kept referring to like FMLA, right? That's when I can use FMLA to help you and all of these things. But the then I kept thinking about it. Why does it have to get to that point? Why can employers do more to support these people? So let me ask you, with your work as a trainer for a lot of these employers, what are some of the things that you think they can do? Let's talk about some of these things they can truly do to help people that live with chronic medical conditions, especially sickle cell disease.
The reason people don't care is because in their mind, they've never felt like they've had to. Sometimes, unfortunately, they will see it as an inconvenience. When you think about anything that isn't, I always bring up lived experience. When you think about anything that isn't your lived experience, because it doesn't add money to your pockets. If you think about the capitalist or any other society, if it's not adding money to your pocket, you're feeling like you can't protect or you can't advance yourself. So first of all, you have to legislate it. And then the more people legislate it, I do feel like it's going to, at least a significant portion of them will start to really investigate it more, because there are actual real consequences for not doing that. And in that process of educating themselves more, it becomes a larger part of the dialogue where people start, caring about that. And for any of these issues, I always say, I think I put a post that said, I hope for society to be able to get to the point where they can dig beyond the why of their proximity to the issue. Like, oh, shoot, that happened. Let's work. I hope that we can dig enough to the part where we actually see how interconnected we all are and how intersectional our stories are, because all of us are connected at the root of this, whether you want to go down to the human level or to the fact that we all add to the economy in some shape or form. And if we stop caring about humans, we're not going to be able to understand how to actually make the world a better place, because the attitudes that come from dismissing people's lived experiences are the exact same attitudes that lead to the downfall of any society. I think I'm better than you, so I need to rule you, or I'm insecure about the power you're growing and I haven't done the work for myself, so I need to suppress you. I need to see it, to exploit you in some shape or form. And that comes from anyone that hasn't done the work to figure out how to understand other people. That's just what will happen, right? So I think legislation is still the first part, Stephen, but I do think that the consequence that will come out of that is that people will have to learn how to understand other people.
Yeah. The last word you used was how to understand other people. And again, I think, to your point, that's something that employers can take on and help improve, all of these different environments with sickle cell. But I think another point too is trust, right? So even for people with sickle cell, it's a trust issue. I was going through the comments last night, and one person said they always disclose that they have sickle cell, but one time they got burnt because they told their boss and it got used against them. And I'm going to always go back. Like I said, I read a lot of different things and I come across different things, and I always try to kind of make sense out of it. I know you like analogies and you like using like little phrases, right? And I saw something you put out again, and you talk about encouraging people to learn other languages, right? And there's a quote: if you talk to a man in a language he understands, it goes to his head. But if you talk to him in a language that is their own language, it goes to their heart.
That's the Nelson Mandela.
I bring that up because I think, that's where the trust comes in. A lot of people with sickle cell, and again, Cass Fruit to chime in here, are worried about, how can I trust this person, right? If this person is saying all these things that they're saying, how can I really believe it's coming from their heart and not from maybe just because I said something. So I think, one thing I want to ask you is, how can, for people with sickle cell, and even for employers, how can they build that trust so that these conversations can keep happening, so that people can even feel comfortable talking about maybe their sickle cell with their employers?
I'm seeing what would be the best option. Tell your employer. I really hope we can get to a place where we can tell the employer actually, and it's not an issue. And I honestly feel like a lot of companies, because of the ignorance that is played, just feel like everyone that they see in their workplace isn't going through something chronic, or that there's no chance that anyone is going through something chronic. And that's the dangerous part. So if I'm advising anyone, I would always tell people, I want you to be able to disclose so that you can be your safest self, and so you can be able to bring your full self into the workplace. the reason I do anything I do is for anyone to fully be themselves, regardless of what their gender is, identity is, sex, racial, any of that. And to me, it actually saddens me when someone has to dampen themselves just so other people can feel better. And so that's why I would say I want people to be able to go to disclose. I am also not ignorant of the privilege I have as someone that isn't chronically ill and that can say that, right? For me, I can say that maybe I can leave a workplace, or I can say I leave this job, I'm quitting this job. And for someone else, maybe this is the only source of income and they're the provider. And I'm not going to pretend like that's not a real reality. And in that case, this is where you and I, Dr. Steve, have to do a lot of the work, where we have to use our positions as advocates to push back and to advocate and to say, no, this isn't okay, right? This is not something to do. And we need to make sure that we affect your bottom line in a way that you care. That's where that privilege comes into play. You turn that privilege into action by understanding the access you have that others don't. And so a lot of us advocates have a lot of work to do, because I feel like, on the live here, we probably have a mix of people with sickle cell as well as people who are championing, sickle cell. And so it's a combination of that. But honestly, I feel like a lot of work is done here. Cass talked about the fact that many people either don't know or don't care. I would argue that a lot of people that don't care. Yep. That's part of the problem. Yeah. So that's where the actual problem exists. Apathy is worse in many. Apathy is worse than hate. There's a quote that says that in all these instances. And so when we are apathetic to that, that's the problem, honestly.
Yeah, I agree with you. Thank you.
I always like to kind of make sure that we have solutions. Yes. After these types of conversations, or something that somebody can do today to better their circumstances. What type of accommodations have you seen brought into the workplace for somebody, or what types of ways can, and I'm talking about like tangible ways that employers can help. Have you seen employers help people living with chronic illnesses, sickle cell?
I haven't seen enough, but I've seen meetings where we've brought people in to talk about their most productive hours so that they can flex during that. Deadlines are shifted so they're not, you don't have someone's deadline be a reason you terminate someone. Designated parking spots for people so that they don't have to worry about finding. Temperature switching, making it more flexible to work from home. I think the pandemic showed many people that this idea that you can't work from home is not necessarily the real truth for many organizations. So working from home, or at least having a hybrid solution, increasing the paid leave, because obviously it's different from anyone that isn't going through a chronic illness. Even flexing sick leave to be more days, or finding unique times during the week. Some people actually, I've seen companies where they throughout the week will say, okay, in a way to make sure your work days are longer, give us the days of the week that you feel work best for you, and we'll adjust every week. So it's a combination of those. But anything like designated parking space, or working with someone on their productivity hours, or creating a hybrid workplace, whether it's remote or in person, those things are immediately able to be done without anyone's budget, right? You can always have that be done completely. And for those rich companies, if they want the idea of private workplace, there's really no excuse for that. But can you ask for higher pay if they're only offering a certain amount? You should be able to. A lot of companies won't, though. I would just say that. Unfortunately, because they have like a certain amount of hours, and there's accounting and there's budget, and they're like, it's going to affect my payroll this way, which is ridiculous. But this is where I exist, right? It's a frustrating fight for me where you have to really go against people's way of doing things. Because if I say, can you keep someone as a salaried employee, but also, you know, treat them as an individual contractor where certain hours can be banked up and then you raise the pay, they start like looking at you like you're speaking another language. And I'm like making the case to them, and they're like, no, it doesn't. That's going to mess up the whole. And we work with, you know, ADP, and ADP is going to run this, and no, we can't do that. And so that's, yeah, you should be able to ask, but unfortunately, I've always come across restrictions when I say that.
So we discussed a little bit about FMLA and, you know, just kind of future forward solutions. What other resources that you know of that are available for people with chronic illnesses?
With the introduction of FMLA gives you something to cite and to you know, to continuously back up, right? And unfortunately, a lot of people with sickle cell disease have had to do the education as well. And so under the FMLA, there are a list of things that you can ask for in terms of vacation, in terms of extended hospital stays, in terms of overnight hospital stays. We just talked, someone is watching this as they're, you know, in the hospital right now, and having that, presenting that, and making sure that you have those actionable things. Okay, so an employer is going to want to know how you're going to add to the productivity or to the income of a company. And so after you've talked about every single thing that you've done, you got to the point where you're hired, you bring this up and say, you know, this is the chronic illness I have, and these are some inevitable things that will happen when I'm going through a crisis or certain instances. I just wanted to point it out to you right now, and maybe you and I, not maybe, sorry, I'm working maybe out of my head. You and I can work on days that you know, we'll be able to do those heavy deadline moments. And in the event that any of these crises happen, is there someone else that you feel like I can pass on to? And so those are the things I normally would advise people to, you know, people to do, and to have those conversations early on. But yes, having the FMLA is good, because it also allows them to know that this person might sue me if I don't, and it's a legit law. And it, you know, as Stephen was saying earlier, unfortunately, some companies only respond to that level of threat.
Yeah, that's funny. When we surveyed the community, and someone said they always disclose that they have sickle cell because legally, you know, they shouldn't be able to do anything. And I believe she was laid off, and she ended up suing them and won her case. So
yeah,
I thought that was very valid reason to share, you know, if anything, to share, just to make sure that, you know,
it's on record, and there's a paper trail.
Exactly.
Yeah, there's a paper trail. It's on record, and people can actually say, and you can actually defend yourself, right? If someone says you didn't do something, like you have the dates and all these things that way, and that can be proven.
I think, you know, one of the things that I saw from the comments too, someone talked about they are an employer, so they hire people now, and for them, they would want other people to disclose that they have sickle cell. And so, you know, I guess speaking in the lens of kind of, I guess she's kind of giving advice to the community about, hey, please share it so we can help you. What advice do you have for people who have sickle cell specifically? You know, I know we can never have the right answer, right? Hey, say it or don't say it, but what specific advice, you know, let's say for those that might want to consider talking about it with their employers or with their managers, how do you advise them as far as going about that conversation, maybe to help them even put themselves in a better spot?
I always tie the conversations to, you know, after you've gone to an interview, you've most likely read the mission statement and the values of the company. And, you know, I'll say, you know, I'm really excited to bring my best self here. I just wanted to highlight, you know, something here that is a big part of who I am. And it's the fact that I have sickle cell, and there are moments when I need to make sure that I'm keeping my health up to par. And these are the instances and these are the moments. But if we're able to do this is the best way I can bring myself into the conversation, because the employer always asks you, what do you need? what any questions you have for me. And anytime an employer asks you what questions you have for me, you can say, hey, well, for someone like me who's eager about this and has this amount of experience, I'm wondering what resources you have or what you think about me being able to continuously show up the best way I am. And they're like, yeah, I think we would love you to bring the best way you are. Okay, well, let me give you some information about what my full self is, and just ability to say full self. Making sure that you are bringing all you can to an event those are keywords, I would say. If you can incorporate that in any conversation you have, full self, full self, full self, you're going to put that person in a position where they feel like any answer they give you is basically saying they don't want you to bring your full self to the workplace. So
I love it. I love it. I think for everybody who just heard what you said, please remember, do what you can so you can bring your full self to work, right? The keyword is your full self. I think that's really what's important. You've shared a lot of great gems here. And I'll tell you guys personally, now I've gone in to listen to some of your podcasts. I told you about that. And I love the interviews you share. So I want the audience to get that opportunity too. So please tell us a little bit more about, your podcast as told by the Nomads and even how that came about and really what you're trying to achieve with that.
So I launched my podcast as told by Nomads in August 2014. I was in the middle of getting my MBA at Fordham in New York City here. And, it was at a time when I was just, I was finding what I wanted to do with my career. I knew I didn't want to do what I was doing. And I was in the middle of my MBA. I was like, I want to continue to find ways to use my voice to share more lived experiences. And so I was doing a lot of reflection. And it occurred to me that the privilege I had being the son of a diplomat, going around different parts of the world and being so close to moments where we were oppressed during the dictatorships gave me a unique perspective on how to bridge cultural divides. So I don't know where I got the idea, but I listened to a lot of podcasts. So I thought maybe if I invite other people who have had similar experiences, we could model some sort of structure for people to fight against whatever is existing right now. And so that's what I did. I just, I found a community of people who identified the same way I did. They say third culture kid or TCKs. So a third culture kid refers to anyone who spends the formative periods of their lives outside the parents' cultures. Diplomatic kids, army brats, all those people, missionary kids. And so within those communities, I will just start to pick people that I liked what they were saying and say, hey, I'd love to share your story. We don't talk about it enough. Just talk about it with an actionable perspective. And then I launched it. Then it started to take off. And it, in the middle of school, it gave me an idea into the power of community, which is to what you've created here to speak to that. And once you give community a voice, there's an unstoppable element that comes with that, or there's a momentum, that is able to actually lead to influence. I think we sometimes live in a moment in a place where we have a series of moments, but we those moments don't become movements because we haven't given those moments momentum. And so that's because of the lack of consistency. And so, so it's called As Told by Nomads. It comes out every week. Anyway, you listen to podcasts. At this point, it talks about anything from business to, solving problems, but over 500 episodes, people will have different ideas on how to, equip you to become the best entrepreneur or business person or just person you can be in general. So I hope you check it out, subscribe, share.
Definitely. Thank you. And you guys should definitely check it out. The other thing I wanted to talk about, your book. So the title of your book, I feel like fits perfectly with the sickle cell community, right?
Right.
So your book is called Use Your Difference to Make a Difference. And really, everybody's different, right? For those that I don't have sickle cell, for those that have sickle cell, even for you living with sickle cell, how can you use that to make a difference? So tell us about your book and even how people can even find it, if anything like that.
Yes. So the book is anywhere books are sold, Amazon. Try and support as many of your local bookstores stops you can. But I know we're broadcasting worldwide. So if you type up Use Your Difference to Make a Difference, the bookstores typically have it, or you can go to the library and request it. I wrote it, based on my experience. I feel like a lot of the problems we have today come and stem from the idea of how we treat people that are different from us, different religion, different that. And we have historically had an adverse relationship with anyone or any group of people we find, different from us. We try to suppress them or, overcome them and vice versa. And so one of my writings, I came up with the phrase, use a difference, make a difference, because I think it's a good way to reframe our world today. We have so many beautiful people with different experiences, but we don't even know about them, and the best way for us to know about them is to be able to find out a way to use our difference to make a difference. And the book highlights 3 ways to do that. So yeah, anywhere books are sold, it's there.
Okay, I got to add it to my reading list here. Thank you all so much for participating in this and listening intently. And hopefully you all found something useful to implement within, your work career.
No, again, Cass is 100% correct, right? As you all know, everything we try to provide is only for educational purposes, right? Everybody's different. And again, that's why we strive to bring amazing guests like we have today to really share the experiences and help you all, for lack of a better term, bring your best self to work. So for me, I think, thank you everyone for joining us today. I really encourage all the employers out there, whether it's the big corporations or the smaller businesses, please take out, note of all of these conversations. There's a lot of things that we all can do in one way or the other to support our colleagues that live with chronic medical conditions like sickle cell, and let's not look down upon them and really provide the support that they all need. Again, if you end up listening to this on our podcast, like we always say, feel free to send us messages in that podcast at s101.org. For our guest, I'm going to actually turn it back to you. Where can people learn more about you? Your social media handles, your website, all of that. Please tell us more about that before I finish the wrap up.
I need Facebook. I need TikTok. I'm everywhere. So Facebook, TikTok, Instagram. If you just type out Rockson, you should be able to find me. So TAYOROCKSON. My website is tyrockson.com. So TAYOROCKSON.com. But on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Rockson, LinkedIn, same thing. And those are my digital homes.
Well, there you have it. Thank you. Thank you for giving us all of that great information. If you all end up having questions related to this episode that you would like, Ty to go over, please send us emails and DMs, and we can make sure to get back to you on that. Again, that's all I have. Thank you, everyone, for joining this discussion today.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Cass. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all.
Thank you. All right. Bye-bye.